excited to be here because this conference did something very unique. It broke borders. And it is not only including academic papers, but also art. And the film that was just barely shown, I thought there were some very profound things that were said that went exactly with what I was talking about. I'm here representing Brigham Young University in the Art Education Department. And I personally believe, and what I do, I guess, attests to that, that art is a very powerful educational tool. As the film was talking about, this was like, honestly, watching this film was so perfect. I was like, this is exactly what I was wanting to say, because art is a catalyst for freeing minds. And as actually my dad was saying in his introduction for this conference, he said that our work here as peace builders is to liberate the oppressed, to open the eyes and soften the hearts of the oppressor. And as I go throughout my presentation, I'm actually presenting some paintings that I have on display upstairs in the atrium, or I don't even know what the little area is, but where the couches are. And they're paintings that I made based on my most recent trip to South Africa, where because my dad was from South Africa and I was born there, and I feel that a lot of the issues that we've already talked about in South Africa are very real and very personal to me, because I have been there, I've seen it. My relatives, my cousins, who are also my very dear friends, are directly intertwined with those issues. And there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of racism, but there's also so much hope, because I feel that we can't help but hope eventually for something. So as I go through the presentation, I'll talk about paintings, but then about the painting individually, but then I'll also talk about the wider philosophy, the idea behind what I'm trying to do. And initially when I was presenting this, I was like, I made the paintings so they would speak for themselves. And so I was thinking, what can I say? It's all there on the page. But then of course, there's always something to say. So hopefully you will benefit from this. This painting is called Truck Ride, kind of obviously, but it is, all of these paintings themselves are very real moments. They all actually happened. So what happened is when I went to South Africa, I had this like junky little camera that I took these snapshots with. It wasn't like one of those fancy high-tech cameras, so the photos sometimes were blurry or they had reflections of the window from which I was taking it out of. So the photos themselves are not very good. They are enough just to jog my memory, so that when I went back to do these paintings, the moment I was there again, so that I could do it from that moment. This, we're stopped at a stoplight, and it's very standard in South Africa to just be bouncing along in the middle of the city in the back of a truck, or with like an animal, or sometimes when you go out to the country where you see these goats. There's goats. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of goats, but and so it's just this very, very, very different experience from Milwaukee, and so kind of this border that is created in art is that there's this stereotype that is also associated with peace building. Oh, perfect. Okay, great. And it's this like hippie idea that we were talking about earlier, that peace, that art, is insincere, it's faddish, and it's an extreme perspective. That it's something that it's something that does something. It doesn't create something, it's just this fluff. That's a result of society, of ideas. But I, doing art, really, really believe, I wouldn't do it if I didn't believe it, that art has immense power to influence people, to change them. I think that in some ways a museum has created a border, and that the museum is where people go where they expect to create art, to experience art, so that elsewhere in life they don't feel that it can be experienced the same way. You have to be in a museum. The museum in a way becomes the artist, and the artist itself is removed from the work, that the experience that the artist has are no longer in the work, and that it's the museum that has put it on this pedestal that has raised it above experience. And in this paper that I wrote for something totally different, but it relates, is I'm in part quoting John Dewey, who is a philosopher of education and of aesthetics. He said that just as mountain peaks do not float unsupported, but are the earth, in one of its manifest operations, art does not rest in a sort of superior hemisphere above humanity, but it is humanity in all of its manifest operations. It is manifestations of our common life, of our experience, of our creative instinct, of our intelligence that makes us all commonly human. And it cannot just be this art, capital A, in the museum, separate, underneath a glass panel that makes the viewer and the art separate, but somehow the art is more worthy of the essence, as Socrates would call it. Okay. So, that was unexpected, these got out of order. Okay, so, experience. We all experience things. Life is a wonderful, great, and terrible, and tragic, and immense experience. We all do what we think is important, and I do art because I think it's important, like I've said. But as an artist, but more importantly, as a human, I believe that our experiences themselves are forms of art, and that the art is created by the experience. This experience, because it actually was an experience, as we were driving from this beach in Cape Town where my uncle has a house. We were there for the weekend, and then we're driving back to the airport, and my uncle says that he had to show us something. And so this wasn't even it, this had nothing to do with it, but as we were driving along the highway, with all these cars whizzing by, there's a carriage bouncing along on the side with the cars going like 60 miles per hour, and there's a carriage and a horse, and this very third world sort of juxtaposition of very different lives. And that just struck me as, what an interesting world. I live a very different life than those people, but we live in the same world, we live in the same time, we're at this moment, we are within 20 feet of each other, but we still are coming from such vastly different perspectives. This painting is called Brick Throwers, and this was in Pretoria, which is one of the capital cities there. We were stopped at a stoplight, and I glanced over and I saw these people. They'd made a chain and they were building on this wall, and they were tossing the bricks. So like, they tossed the bricks up to the person who was building them on the wall, because the pile of bricks was like 30 feet away or something. And not only is it an interesting example of human interaction, of the potential of working together, but it was just a very small glimpse into a more formal economy, which is something that which is obviously in South Africa, but there's a very, very prevalent informal economy where people live day to day based on whatever they can do. So my thought that I had, though, about the informal and formal economy is, though, that how different really is the informal economy from the formal economy. They're based for the same reasons: to survive, to get gain, to grow, to do things. And the formal economy really is just more borders, more regulations, more rules, more expectations. And though I think that in this sort of context, borders may not always be obstructions, they can be structure. And that from a certain perspective, from a certain angle, the borders, I don't want to say borders, but like the lines that we put in place, just like we would put lines in a painting, they create something. And sometimes it may be something that dismantles something, but often it can be for a better purpose. This painting is one of my favorites. And this is what my uncle drove us across the highway on our way to the airport to show us. This painting is called Walk Through Town. It's an example of the shanty towns in South Africa, in bustling, teeming, uncharted swells of the informal economy. The paintings that I created were in themselves witnesses of the idea that I was trying to communicate. That in the experience of creating these, I used all black ink. The yellow and the blues and whatever colors you see are just faded ink that I washed out with water because I had so many different types of ink. They washed out to different colors. I thought that was interesting symbolically, that for a variety of reasons, but that how simple this piece really is. It is just black and white. That's all it is. But on initial glance, you're almost overwhelmed by this complexity. And that you think, oh, there's no possible way this could possibly be something. But you look at it, and the longer you look at it, it becomes familiar, it becomes recognizable. And I thought that that was a lot like culture shock. How when you go somewhere different and unusual, you're suddenly overwhelmed. There's so much new. It's like every day just flies by, and 3 weeks have gone by, and you're like, this is the richest 3 weeks of my life. Like, travel kind of happens that way. But that when we return home to something that may be very normal to us, it's the same experience for anyone else who's from something different. That something overwhelming becomes familiar to us, like this painting. If you were to look at it every day, learn to eventually memorize the marks. Experience. I've talked about how art is experience. Coming from South Africa, we deal a lot with racial interaction, and because of such the prevalent history, you've already heard about it in Dr. Fritz's. I almost called him Umhanis because he's my dad's really good friend, and in South Africa you call everyone Wum, which means uncle, and so, but never mind. Anyways, so he was talking about South Africa, some of the history and how they've come out of this tangled mess and really brought something out of it, but then how going to South Africa, there still are a lot of problems. Because of the open borders, there's a lot of refugees that come down to South Africa, and they're completely, most of them are very much unrecognized in any kind of economy, because even in the informal economy where they try and make jobs, a lot of the people who already live there are vying for those same jobs. And so they think of them as competition, and it's just a very tense situation. But, so here in Milwaukee, we also, in the talk that was given by Monty Peck yesterday, we learned about how Milwaukee is one of the most segregated cities in the US. I grew up here for the past, for the 10 years before I went off to school. And I grew up just 20 minutes north of here of the Locust Avenue, if you guys know where that is. It's an area that probably isn't the worst in town, but it's been run down, but there's a lot of work that people are actually doing to try and build it up. If you guys have heard of the Dominican Center for Women, my high school, actually, my German teacher, he would bring the German club and the German Honor Society every year to work in this neighborhood. We would pick up trash, we would rake leaves, we would paint benches, we would do whatever was needed. And coming from North Side, River Hills, Glendale, that area where it's this very mostly white, middle class to upper class area, we suddenly realized that just 20 minutes south was a whole different world, almost. The people who live very differently from us. And in this experience, where we went and we served these people, I came to realize that the borders that are there, whether it's a highway, whether it's a river, whether it's a neighborhood, are essentially, they are nothing. Because it's not just them and us, it's us. It's all of us. And we grow, or we don't. We have to grow together. We don't have a lot of time. But when we were there, briefly, After the service project, we stopped in the church, and a lot of the kids from that neighborhood, they went to youth groups in this church, and so this place was full. We went in the basement and we had this lunch with all these kids who had also been working with us today from the neighborhood. They were building up their own neighborhood, and we started talking, and then these girls, they took my friend and I, we went in this hallway and they did this worship dance for us, and it was just this very interesting experience because I come from a religious background. I am a Latter-day Saint. Oh, oops. But, and so religion has always been a very important part of my life, and so seeing how these people had also valued their religion and how they expressed it, it was just a very good connection moment. It was like we were crossing borders. Like no matter they were different race, different social or whatever level, that we were just friends. We were enjoying just this dance, and it was just a sweet experience. This painting is called Carrying, and it's actually the painting, the walk through town painting based on the shanty towns. This was based on a photo that was taken moments before I took the other photo. So this woman that you see here is actually also in the other painting, Carrying the Bucket. This art is not only experience, but it is perspective. Art can change our perspectives, but also we see our perspective itself can be art in how we see the world. But not everything can be art, says the critic, but then nothing can be art. This is an excerpt from a paper that I wrote, but if we were to paint the sidewalks with Van Gogh and adorn the street corners with Rodin, they would melt into the commonalities of life, of the mundane, and they would not be seen as art. The critic sees the museum as an artist, as I've described, that defines and creates the art. But since our perspective is hindering what we truly see, our interaction falsifies the work, and only through the authority of decision can art, the craft, be art. That without the prestige, it is just that, an object. I do not think that is what art is, because art is not the object, it is the encounter that we have with the object, whether through the creation of the work, or whether through the interaction with the work that you see here, viewing, listening, or watching. This painting is called Stolen Power, and when we were visiting South Africa, this is what my uncle came to show us. Not just the shanty towns, but what these are power lines that people have cut into and literally have stolen the power from it. They take live wires and they connect them back to those shanty huts, and they power TVs or radios or whatever they want to with them, but they aren't paying for it because it's, how do you possibly track that? And so this, to me, came to really represent the entangled condition of human progress. We move forward as a whole. If we see the actual foundation of power is laid, where everyone is trying to get a piece, we create a border of opportunity. We have limited our access to progress. Sometimes borders are efforts to dissociate for the advantage of the fittest, yet thereby further entangle the growth of the few or the elite with the whole. The problem, I feel, also fits into this. Problem, whatever it may be, whether it's poverty or environmental degradation, is always seen as this mess. How do we possibly solve this mess? It's so complicated. There's so many different sides to the issue, so many different perspectives, so many different possible outcomes, and yet we try and find a solution. We try and find the simple solution that will answer it. Just as this painting is initially a mess, it is simple. It is still just black ink on white paper. And this painting is wires. In the presentation that was just before me, talked about one of the artists from the
Yes.
From the LECRA said that the government could dissociate the van, they could break everything up, but they could not take away art. It could not prevent a human from making art. It could not take away the human spirit. We all come from very different backgrounds, very different expectations of life. We expect different things from different people, from ourselves, and from our culture. These are the borders and barriers of difference that we create, or opportunities. But there's this quote from Van Gogh that says that there are drawings, he sees drawings and huts in the poorest, or drawings and pictures in the poorest of huts and the dirtiest of corners. Gains a new meaning when we think of what we expect from our surroundings. That art is what we create, are manifestations of a phenomenological newness with which humanity is uniquely and individually capable of seeing. It is an understanding that art is not elite and exclusive, and not just for the privileged or the counterculture. It is innate and it is equal. I'm not saying that everyone should be an artist, but that when we adopt a perspective of art, we see with inequality with the newness. As both a character and result of our environment, art is the lens from which we see, the mirror by which we reflect on our condition, and the fruit of what we experience.